We're going to get started. So I just wanted to thank you for coming, first of all, and then to introduce you to Allie, Erica, and Sonia. And they're from Coast to Cascade Grizzly Bear Initiative, and they're going to talk to us about grizzly bears in the area. Thank you so much for coming, you guys.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'll start us off. Thank you so much for hosting us as well, and everyone for coming out. That's awesome. We're part of Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative. So as an overview today, these are some of the things that we'll be going through. So a bit about who we are, what we do, what grizzly bear recovery is and looks like. Allie's going to walk us through our DNA project spotlight. And then Sonia's going to wrap up with her expertise in the bear behavior and conflict and coexistence space. So my name's Erica Van Loon. I grew up in the Pemberton Meadows, and I've worked with Coast to Cascades for about 2.5 years now. I'm the communications coordinator. This is Sonia Nickel. She's our bear response specialist, and she's been with us since last October. And this is Allie Trescott, a bit hard to see there, but she's our DNA project coordinator, and this is her second season doing the DNA project with us. So for those of you that don't know, first of all, there's brochures and stickers in front of you. Feel free to take those. There's a bit of this info in there as well. We're a very small, nonprofit, non-government organization. So as a nonprofit, as I'm sure many of you are familiar, it's a difficult world to be in that we're entirely dependent on funding from private organizations and grants. So that really limits our ability to do what we do. Our focus, we started back in 2013, and we're focused on the recovery of threatened grizzly bear populations in Southwest BC. So we'll get to a map in a second here. It's also in that brochure for anyone that pops that open. And on the ground, we do a lot of collaborating. So collaboration is key in this work. So we collaborate with area First Nations, local communities like Pemberton, and local organizations like the PWA. We have a great team of science advisors, so some really vetted names like Bruce McClellan, who we work with and who guide a lot of our work from a scientific, Is there any way to turn that right? I am not sure, but maybe. If we turn the lights off, do they all go off, or? Is that better?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. And the last one is government agencies. So where it makes sense, we work with the Conservation Officer Service on the public safety side, and also the Ministry of Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship from a species management side of things. So just zooming out a bit in the context of grizzly bears in North America, for those that aren't aware, this is a map of the historic versus current distribution of the population. So they went all the way down to the Mexican border, pre-colonization. So this is a huge range and way far out east in Canada and the States as well. And now today we're limited to this darker red area here. So a significant shrinking of the natural population of grizzly bears across the continent. As we know, with settlement and colonization brought a whole range of threats to the species. So most of them have been shot in those areas and extirpated. But in a more modern day, these are just a range of the threats that they face in day-to-day life. So humans keep expanding, pressures keep expanding on the species, and all of these lead to, the threat of the overall species today. So this is the map I was talking about, specific to our work at Coast to Cascades. This is where we focus. So,
is this now numbers?
No. So these are government numbers. So we don't have the funding or ability to update the provincial populations. So these are from 2018. So they are quite outdated. There hasn't been an update through the government since, but this is what we go off for the map purposes. So Pemberton here, right in the middle. So it's a really interesting zone that's at the center of all of these what are called grizzly bear populations that we are focused on. So these different colored boundary areas are different population units, as they're called. And in the more southern areas, the darker the red, the more of a conservation concern it is. So you might have heard Stein Hatlatch area in terms of grizzly bears. They are critically endangered in that area by the International Union for the conservation of nature. So our goal is really to help try to naturally bring genetics into the areas where they are not getting into. So South Chilcotin is doing pretty good. It's increasing, but we're not getting genetic flow into the suffering populations in the south. So things like the Duffy Road, Pemberton Meadows, these are high human use areas, and that has a huge impact on grizzly bears and how they can expand naturally. So that's what we call fracture zones, and that's where we focus our work. This is the Pemberton Meadows. I'm sure some of you recognize that. I live right here. I've grown up there my whole life. Grizzly bears have always been a part of the landscape there. I've seen them my entire life growing up. But what we're seeing now is a more permanent population throughout the summer months, which historically, during the time of shoot, shovel, and shut up, was not exactly what we saw, because when they came into the valley bottom, they're mostly getting shot. So we are seeing them now. Conservation is working, recovery is working. But to do all of those things, we need a lot of dedicated people and programming that support and step in where maybe the government isn't supporting communities living at the interface as much as they should be. So as a non-government nonprofit, that is our goal. So when we talk about recovery in human-dominated landscapes, this kind of goes hand in hand with a term called coexistence. So I'm sure you're familiar, but in terms of grizzly bears, this really means what sharing a landscape looks like between humans and bears in a way that's safe for both people and the bears. We know it's possible. There's a lot of questions or fear around that in itself, but we are not the first place that this is happening in. There's communities, in Montana, in the Banff area, and Sonia will get into some of that are decades ahead of us. So it's absolutely possible. Just takes a bit of a steep learning curve and a lot of time to get to that place. So we are in that process now. But a key to coexistence is realizing that humans have a key role to play as well. We can't have all the responsibility or blame on the bears. As humans living in bear country and the amazing valley that this is, we have a responsibility to make the right choices too. So on the coexistence front, as Coast Cascades, we have a number of initiatives, but one of the main ones is stuff like today. So outreach and education is a really important piece of grizzly bear conservation. They're a largely misunderstood species, and it's really important that we communicate the message of the species and their value and what living with them looks like and how to do those right things that I just mentioned, because a lot of people aren't aware, they don't know, and people need help as we see grizzly bears recovering into communities like the Pemberton Meadows. So we're there to support that process, and education outreach is an important part of that. Another one is electric fencing. So I would say one of the number one rules of coexistence is that humans need to have attractants secured. Attractants being food sources that are linked back to humans. So we have a responsibility to make sure that we are not drawing bears in to these human-dominated landscapes on the basis of food. So things like chickens, carrots, fruit, bees, all those things, we need to make sure we're securing them so that we're not allowing bears to eat our food sources. Bears then link us to that food. Then we may lead down the path to conflict, food conditioned bears, bad, bad, bad. So electric fencing is a proven, incredible method to, as a piece of coexistence, to reduce that human-bear conflict. So since 2021, Coast Cascades has been running an electric fence cost share program. So to date, we have helped install 23 electric fences, and that translates to over 40 acres of these various crops and animals that have been secured now behind an electric fence. So through that program, we cover 50% of material costs and help set up the fence in some cases or do site assessments on what that looks like. So this is a really key program with us. If anyone here has any questions, our boundaries do not cover the village of Pemberton. We're more Meadows and Lil Watt out to Darcy area. But if anyone is in those areas, please come talk to Sonia or I. We can discuss if anyone's interested in that. That's all for me. I'll pass now to Allie, who's going to walk us through our DNA project.
Thank you, Erica. All right, so yeah, as Erica said, I'm Allie, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the Grizzly Bear DNA project. It started last May, so May 2024, and we were lucky to have support from the Naquatqua Nation, Lil Watt Nation, and the Pemberton Wildlife Association, and also biologists like Bruce McClellan, his daughter Michelle McClellan, and Lana Chiarniello, and then lots of volunteers as well. So what is the DNA project? Well, Erica spoke about the fracture zones and the population units, and we want to know kind of how bears are using these fracture zones and if they're crossing between the population units. So the overarching goals are to inform coexistence and promote connectivity, but we want to know kind of where and how to direct our efforts. So the DNA project helps us look at which bears are present in the fracture areas. So we can look at genetics, obviously, with DNA, and then demographics. So family units, which would be females with cubs, and then subadults and adults. We use remote cameras for that. And then also where they came from. So using past detections, we have this big DNA database from previous studies. And so we can say, like, we got this bear here this year, but a couple years ago, he was detected in this area. And then who these bears are related to. So what populations are their relatives from? And then we can create family trees that way. And then how are they using the fracture areas? So again, with remote cameras, we can look at time of day, where they're mostly using. So like, are they more in human-dominated areas? Or are they more in the wilderness? Based on the cameras, and then also how often they're using each of those areas. So how do we get grizzly bear DNA? Well, we do that through hair samples, and we actually need the follicles of the hair. And so in order to do that without actually physically catching a grizzly bear or wrestling a grizzly bear or whatever, we use the hair snare method. So that is with barbed wire. And we have two ways of doing that. We either wrap them around existing mark trees, so bears that are scratching on trees, or we use corrals with scent lure, and it's basically a non-caloric reward bait. So we actually use cow's blood. It's super stinky. We carry it around in jerry cans. That's me down there. It's not gasoline. And we dump it in the middle on a pile, and then the idea is that the bear will come and investigate. And then leave us a nice big sample of hair like it's done there. And then these are our remote cameras that we attach to the trees as well. So we can see, like, you know, we can tell the difference if it's a black bear or grizzly bear that's left the hair, or if it's a female, like I said, with cubs. The DNA doesn't give us age, so it's good to also be able to look at the bears that are leaving the hair. And then, yeah, we have our sites set in the fracture zone, so the Pemberton Valley and then Mount Currie to Darcy as well. And so this is, it's working on here, but not on there.
Oh, here we go.
This is one of the corral sites. So, yeah, that bear went in and then walked over the wire. And this one's maybe a little bit better of an example because you can actually see that where his first snags, and he kind of, yeah. Can you see? Do you want me to try and replay? Okay. And then, and then here, hopefully, all these these are our mark trees. So, yeah, like I said, existing mark objects for the bears. Hopefully, this loads. Are rubbing like this, and then we just attach barbed wire to it, and then we can get the hair samples that way. Oh, maybe.
Oh.
Can I
You tap them? No, Well, some of them are kind of working.
Old, like the town.
Yeah, so I'll just okay. Although you can't really see the videos, you can see this bear is standing on all fours, and she's, hopefully it works, she's wiggling back and
There's
forth.
one on the right.
Yeah, those two on the right. Then this bear's lying down to scratch, like they scratch in all different ways. In the middle, he gets up and then he actually urinates. So they're basically leaving scent. They're communicating through their chemical scent glands. And oh.
There you go. Slow-mo.
Too many on once.
I know, it worked at my house. I should have separated them, but maybe if you want to come up and have a look after, we can do that.
You can see it on the map.
Yeah, it is work. Well, not right now. But anyways, they rub and then they leave us their hair. So it's a really great way to get those samples. We also can't use the bait in more human-dominated areas because that would be dangerous if we're drawing bears into somewhere, like some of our properties or our sites are on people's properties, so we wouldn't use bait on those areas. So some 2024 results. We are still collecting data for this year, so I only have the results for 2024. And with the cameras that we used, we actually found that family groups and subadults were more frequently detected in rural areas. And so what that kind of says to us is that the more kind of vulnerable or younger animals will be using human-dominated areas as a human shield. They're basically using, like, trying to get away from more dominant males that may compete with them. And so, yeah, they actually use humans as a shield. Yeah, which is in the literature, and that's kind of what we made inferences with the data that we found. And then we also found no evidence of nocturnality in human-dominated areas. So we had kind of 50-50 with the daytime and nighttime detections, which you would hope that bears were tending to become more nocturnal in areas where there's lots of humans to avoid human presence, but we didn't find that. And then with the DNA, we detected 15 new individuals with our DNA, and 7 of those were new. 2 of those new individuals, however, have been confirmed dead. But this is not to say that there's only 15 bears in those areas or that there's only 7, new bears. It's just what we found, and there can be a lot of error with the DNA as well. But with these individuals, we were able to put together some family trees. This is really fun and exciting to do. The pictures that you see here, these are bears that we found this year, and those pictures that we found that we got along with them. And then the kind of silhouettes here are other samples that were submitted last year, but that we don't have photos for. And then these are bears that were in the database, but that we didn't detect last year. So we can't say if they're dead or alive or what they're doing, but it was a good way to kind of connect the bears that we do have. So if we start with this bear here, this is a bear that some people in the valley know as Clover. And
and some dogs in the valley.
She knows that name, yeah. And so then we can say, like, oh, this is Clover's full sister. These are her parents, and piece things together that way. And what we found was that she's actually quarter Stein. So at some point, her ancestors moved out of that critically endangered, genetically isolated Stein area and bred with a non-Stein bear and then had Clover. Which is great, so that we know that bears are moving across those fractures and between populations, but we also really want bears moving into those areas, that critically endangered area. So they're moving out, but maybe not in. And then, yeah, we also detected, so these are the yearlings that some of you may have been aware of last year. And we actually also got their dad as well. And he was not Stein. So they were an 8th, but he came from the Birkenhead area. So he was like within that kind of between the fracture zones of the Pemberton Valley and the Portage Road. So that was cool as well. And then over here, just a couple more bears. This was like a really old male that we found in the Pemberton Valley. And then possibly his grandson, but it wasn't as clear. But he had 101 samples in the database. So like he, yeah.
Still alive?
As of last year, yes. So yeah, oops, sorry. He's doing his thing out there. Yeah. Yeah. And then this bear had like no family. I couldn't find really any, well, that's not to say he it just wasn't in the database. So yeah, sometimes there's that as well. It's just this random bear, and he's also doing his thing, but hopefully eventually we'll build on that. And then over here, these are the bears from the Stein. So to the east of the Portage Road fracture, we had 3 bears detected, one that we don't have a photo for. And they're all related in one way or another. And this is a female, and she was actually the first female detected in that area in 50 years. So that's really good. And then I think there were a few hikers that reported there was a female cub, so we can only imagine that's her. But we know that the other bears we detected were relatives of hers, so hopefully those cubs are not inbred, but it's possible that they are. But anyways, this is just I should wrap up, but an idea of what we can do with all this DNA. And it's just been, this is just 1 year, right, for us. So like, and then lots of previous studies, of course, as well. But for us, like we were able to make these connections. And so we're just hoping to continue to build on that. Yeah. Okay, I'll shut up now.
That was awesome. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about the sort of conflict coexistence side of things. And so I'm the bear response specialist with Coast to Cascades. But I like to start at the beginning. So let's start at the beginning. What are some differences between black bears and grizzly bears? Let's go. Little crowd participation. Come on. All that tea caffeine should be getting in you. That or you're falling asleep.
Hunt
So
a black bear, but a grizzly hunts you.
I mean, the only grizzlies that I've known that tried to hunt me were injured. So don't go after an injured grizzly bear, I guess. No, come on. There's like you've got some like you got some hints. Yeah, great. Okay. So I heard hump. How about anything else? Claws. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So awesome. Great ones. And now I want to say, well, why do they have those differences? So do we know? Yeah, it does actually mostly have to do with that. So basically, black bears and grizzly bears actually evolved completely separately until about 13,000 years ago. And so grizzly bears evolved in treeless areas like the plains and the tundra. And so they evolved to kind of dig. That's why they have the big crazy claws. It's just like a little trowel in your garden. And then the hump is actually a chunk of muscle. And again, it's just to help facilitate that digging so they don't get tired. So they're just little like, rototillers. That's sort of how they evolved. And then black bears evolved in the forest, in mountainous and forested areas. And so those short, sharp little claws are so that they can climb up trees, right? And get up stuff like that. So that's sort of where that comes from. What does it mean in terms of bear safety? Not much. So we did used to kind of talk about, if it's a black bear, do this. If it's a grizzly bear, do that. We're moving away from that because the reality is you kind of want to do the same things, right? You want to secure your attractants, don't have your stuff lying around so you get a food conditioned bear. I'm going to talk about food conditioning and habituation in a little bit. Make noise if you're hiking, go in groups, have bear spray, know how to use it, right? Like those things are all the same across either species. And the reason is because there's 3 main things that will get a bear aggressive. And it doesn't matter what species it is. None of them like this. So don't throw a surprise party for a bear. They don't like them. They will get very upset. If they're snacking, they'll get defensive. And then a mother will protect her cubs. Big surprise? No, right? Would you take a bone from a dog? No. So pretty logical reasons for why people get into trouble. However, where we kind of see that evolutionary history coming out and the difference in them is in behavior and why they kind of do the things they do. So grizzly bears, well, let's start with black bears. So black bears, they had those short, sharp claws, right? So they could escape if they needed to up a tree at any time. So their fight or flight mode is to flee, right? If they feel threatened, they have escape terrain everywhere. So they can just get out of there in a second. Grizzly bears didn't have that luxury. They were out in basically treeless environments. There was no escape terrain. And so their fight or flight is fight. Not because they particularly want to, just because that was their only choice. And so that also factors into a bit about kind of what I've seen in my time working with bears about sort of their underlying baseline behaviors. And so in my experience, black bears are very, very curious, and they're much more likely to take risks throughout that curiosity, right? So they'll come right in close to people, and that's risky behavior, right? If you're thinking about it. And I think that they do that because they know that they can always escape, and they've sort of, evolved with this idea that they can always get away. Grizzly bears are quite a bit warier. So they just they kind of look at humans and they're like, "Ooh, these guys are weird and unpredictable. I don't care for it. I don't like them." And they kind of try and keep their distance, And you can see here, this bear, like, she's paying attention, right? She's like, "Oh, shoot, a human's coming." And in a minute, she's going to turn tail and run to cover. And so this is sort of their baseline, their behavioral differences in kind of how they perceive the world, right? But so one thing I hear quite a bit is like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but I've lived in this valley for X number of years, usually somewhere between 45 and 50 or 60. And I never used to see so many grizzly bears, and now we have grizzly bears living in the valley bottoms. And that's fair enough. I would say there's probably three main reasons for that. The first is sort of that we heard about that, conservation efforts are working. So there are generally more bears. However, there's still far fewer grizzly bears than black bears, for instance, in the province. Shoot, shovel, and shut up. That used to be the way. As soon as a bear would actually start to stay in the valley bottom, it would get destroyed by a resident or something. And then that would be that. I think that's happening less now, although it is still happening. And then the last one is what you're seeing is actually a behavioral adaptation. And it's subdominant bears that are using people, a little bit like Ali touched on, as a protective shield against large males. And so basically these subdominant animals are choosing people as less scary than the backcountry. So why would that be? Well, the reason is because in the dominance hierarchy of bears, big males are on top. So they're at the top of the dominance hierarchy, and they get to choose where they want to live. And they choose backcountry areas far, far away from humans because grizzly bears baseline don't like humans. So that means that there's essentially, I think of it as pressure. There's essentially this pressure that's being applied to these lower dominance animals by these big males, and it's basically pushing them inwards towards people. That's the way I think of it. And so the bears are choosing to come closer to people as a way to avoid these guys so that either they don't eat their babies or they don't eat them, right? So subadults or your teenagers, they get eaten. Sorry, bud. And then, oh, okay, you're still safe for a little bit. Actually, they eat babies too. No, anyway. You're safe for now. So basically there's these demographics, right, and so they're making choices to try and stay alive. And in the case of the females who decide to sort of reside in this area, they're making those choices to keep their babies alive. And so this is something that I saw a lot on the landscape where I used to work. So I used to work in Banff, Yoho, and Kootenay National Parks for over a decade as a wildlife officer. And so I got to know entire matriarchal lineages of bears. So I knew the grandmas, the moms, the daughters, the granddaughters, and you kind of watch them cycle through. And it's pretty neat. You get to know them pretty well. And one thing that I really saw over and over and over again and was pretty impressed by was that you'd have, so this is a hard picture to see, but there's a female here with 2 young eager cubs on the front lawn of the Chateau Lake Louise. These guys. Anyway, so there's literally barricades up here to try and stop people from going in next to them. Every time you turn around, though, there'd be somebody in there with them. And so basically what I saw was that you would teach the mom, or more likely she had already been taught by you when she was a cub, but teach the mom and cubs, and then she's also teaching her cubs about how to navigate this high human use landscape really well. And they're doing it half the time. They weren't even being noticed, right, until they got to like sort of a safe-ish feeding site. So they're moving through this landscape and nobody knew they were there. So like this is what I'm talking about. Like they don't really want to deal with people, and they're just sort of using us for their own benefit, essentially, for a type of security. So then she would kick these guys out after 3 years, and you'd have these little teenagers, this is one of them, on the landscape. And they do know the rules of the game, but they're choosing not to play by the rules, right? Teenagers, all species. So they are pushing boundaries, testing dominance, trying to see where they fit in the world, and they're a pain in the butt for about 4 years or something. And you just keep working with them, and you keep reinforcing the same rules of the game, and eventually they graduate into kind of adulthood. And especially females, they will stay on the territory, near the territory of their mothers. They'll stay on the landscape, and they revert back to everything their mom told them as soon as they have dependent offspring, because now they have to take care of those cubs, right? They're not just their own little busy bodies trying to figure out where they fit. They have a bigger purpose. And so that was pretty neat. I saw it over and over again with lots and lots of different bears. So what does this all mean for your landscape? Well, I think the first thing is just to remember that this is a pressure thing, right? And so we were talking about the pressure from the big males inwards. The other part of the process now is that you do want to exert some pressure from the inside out. So the humans need to be exerting a bit of pressure as well. And the point of that is that not everywhere is acceptable for a bear to be, right? In terms of like coexistence, if you're living with these bears on your landscape, you don't want them near human houses, near barns, near chicken coops, right? Like these are all places that they're going to get into trouble. And also if they see a human, you want them to leave. That's a bit of a different one. We're going to focus right now on these sort of structures. And so we call them no-go zones. And here you can see a number where I've mapped, and these are people's properties. And one thing that you'll notice is that there's still quite a lot of space here that are not no-go zone, right? And this is kind of the point. It's that we can coexist with grizzly bears. If they're hanging out in your back 40 fields and not coming into your no-go zone, where your house is, where your kids play, where all that sort of stuff happens, is that okay? It's worked in a lot of other places, right? So that's my job, and is to sort of teach them these boundaries. And so the boundaries of no-go zones, one of the big important factors is that it has to be something that is recognizable to both the bear and the human. And so the bear needs to be able to know what the line is, essentially, right? Because otherwise it's confusing. How are they supposed to tell? So we use things like fences. Around here, I've been using mowed grass because the grass is so tall in the Pemberton meadows, right? So it's like literally cover or it's mowed. So that's a great delineation. And so things like tree line and stuff like that, right? If they're in the tree line moving around, that's totally fine. So these are your sort of no-go zones. And you might be saying like, okay, well, what the heck is pressure? How do you pressure a bear out of there, right? Well, let's look at a couple examples. Is it working? Nope. Step one, can you see the bears? There's 2 of them. Yeah, both of them. So this is a female. This is one of my favorite bears with her cub. That's the mom. That's 142. That's the mom. Cub is, I can't remember how old he was. Where are you going? No. Nope. Don't like that.
She knows you.
Oh yeah, I've known her whole life. So I left it a little bit longer just because I wanted you guys to see the reaction, right? So she clearly understood that she wasn't allowed to cross the bridge. I left the whole thing in because this part's funny. So she realizes that she just left without her cub and her cub is not paying attention. And then the cub's like, oh no, where'd my mom go? And then they surprise each other. And they look over the Jersey barrier at each other. 10 out of 10 ridiculous goofballs. These are my bears. And the cub's still just being ridiculous. I'm pretty sure that's 2-year-old, so it's going to get kicked out next spring. Oh, I know. Tell me about it. So here's another one. This one, so the point of the last one, I was on foot when I was doing that. Now I'm in my truck. And so what she's going to do is she's going to try and go into this thick area and deke me out. But I know she's going to do that, so I beat her there and I turn around. Because we're generally heading this way. I'm walking her out of the campground. This is the same bear. It's the same day because I realized I never took videos of them. Actually, maybe it's not the same day because that cub looks smaller. Anyway. Yeah, so the point is that, like, what was I doing? Like, what were the two things that happened there? There was a me and there was a voice. That was it, right? I didn't use any fantastic tools or anything like that. But there is something that I was doing there, and it comes down to this. It's learning theory. And so everything that we do, we're basically trying to teach them things. And you might be like, how can you teach a bear? They're pretty smart. And so we use the same principles as we use with everything. You ever taught a dog, a horse, a kid? Basically, the basic principles are that given a behavior, there needs to be an immediate and consistent response. So negative behaviors require an immediate and consistent negative response. Positive behaviors require an immediate and consistent positive response. Can't give a treat to a bear. So your positive for a bear is the release of the pressure. Okay, so that's why the no-go zones are really important too, right? So you need to have these delineations because you're trying to make a clear picture in that bear's head of what is acceptable on this landscape for it to like live on a shared landscape with us. And so that no-go zone, let's just say it's your fence, right? As soon as it steps into the area, ideally you're there to meet it. You rarely are. Usually you catch them somewhere that they're not supposed to be and then you go chasing them out. So then, then it's like, okay, get out of here, use your voice and stuff. As soon as they hit that delineation and they get onto the good side, once they're out of the no-go zone, you have to stop immediately because that's their reward, right? The reward is stopping applying pressure. So, yeah, it's surprisingly effective. Here's one more. This is the female with one cub up in the meadows. So this is the very first time I met her. I had been hiding. She hadn't seen me. And then I stood up. I didn't even use voice. And this is how she responded.
Yeah, I'm out of here.
A full 180-degree walk away. I'm going to show that one again because I think it's pretty brilliant. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of what she did there, which is wait a second. Okay, so she sees me, and then she's pretty used to people leaving, so she tries a couple steps to see if I'll leave. When I don't leave, she's like, ooh, didn't like that, absolutely not, and I'm out of here, right? And she walked out to about 150, 200 meters before she started feeding again. That's how uncomfortable she was. And all I did was stand there. I mean, granted, I'm pretty good at being a big, scary, dominant bear with just my body language, but really, that was just a response to people like exhibiting any amount of dominance towards her. She just hasn't had that experience. And so when, the first couple of things that I've showed you there so far, the only ones, that's stuff that people can do. Anyone can do, right? You can use your body. You can use your voice. You can clap, clang on the side of your vehicle, smash some pots and pans, use an air horn, use a siren, whatever. All those things are types of pressure that you can apply yourselves. And so basically when we apply these types of tools, we use a continuum of force. And so for me, I can, what?
Oh, just the thing was popping up.
So I'm allowed to use other types of tools because I'm permitted by the government of BC. And so anything that leaves a barrel is considered a firearm. So I have a paintball gun with chalk balls in it. I'll show you something with that in a minute. And I also have a shotgun that shoots rubber bullets. These are things that I'm allowed to do because I've been permitted by BC Gov. If anyone else was to do it, it would be, illegal under the Wildlife Act. So just a heads up, just so we're all aware. But these first two things, anyone can do. Non-impact projectiles. Oh yeah, so when we apply force, we always start with the lowest level of force and then slowly work our way up. And we basically always give that bear an opportunity to make good life choices. So if that bear turns around here, then that's it. You're not applying any more pressure, right? Cool. All it needed was voice and body presence. Perfect. If that bear needs some chalk ball at its feet and it turns around here, great. You're not impacting it. It did the thing. And basically what you're doing here is, have you ever used a shock collar on a dog? Doesn't take too many shocks, right? Before you can just use the little buzz or whatever it is. Because it knows that there's more possible tools in the toolbox. So then it doesn't need the full suite of tools. It doesn't need to be shocked very often. It just needs a little reminder that that tool is there, right? And so that's the same kind of thing that we do here. So then when we get to impact projectiles, I talked a little bit about these ones. That's what I'm able to do. But there's two that are actually that you guys also have, and that's electric fences and bear spray. So electric fences are a very, very effective deterrent. So think about immediate and consistent, right? Every single time that a bear goes up and investigates an electric fence with its nose, it gets a zap. It only takes about 2 zaps, they never do it again. Doesn't take them very long to figure out what electric fences are, and then they just steer clear of them on the entire landscape. But very, very effective, and a tool that's within your toolbox. So if you have a really high level of attractant, it should be secured with an electric fence. It's the best tool at your disposal. If you had a bear coming towards you in a way that you found threatening, you can bear spray it right in the face. That is a very big deterrent. It's awful, awful stuff. So these are some tools that you also have at your disposal. Here's some pictures from what? These are some of the tools that I use. So here's my rubber bullets, chalk balls, paintballs. This is the chalk ball gun. This is the shotgun. So this is what we used last year with those 2 yearlings. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that, it's like, well, how come, you're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at them? Because we ended up getting to rubber bullets pretty darn quick. And the reason for that was that by the time I got on the ground with them, they had already gotten into some food sources, some non-natural food sources. And so the way that deterrents work is that they're only really effective ideally you catch these behaviors before they kind of escalate to the point where they're getting into stuff. But if you only give them a light tap on the wrist when they're getting a Big Mac with fries, it's not going to have much of an effect, right? So it needs to be sort of proportional. And so by the time I got to these guys, they were starting to get into stuff. And I kind of knew that if we weren't able to turn these behaviors around, they would get dead one way or the other. And so in that case, we were running around shooting them with rubber bullets, Erica and I. And then here's the chalk ball gun. With those little guys, it was too bad. I think that if we had gotten on the ground with them, when they first got kicked out in June or something, late June, early July, I think we probably could have taught them better, manners, maybe kept them alive on the landscape, but can't tell for sure. And so basically when bears get into food, that's when we have a problem, okay? And so you might have heard these terms get tossed around a bunch, habituation and food conditioning. And what do they actually mean? Also, how am I doing on time? Do I need to wrap this up? Probably soon. Anyway, so habituation is just something that, honestly, we all do it. It's just gaining tolerance of something the more that you do it and nothing bad happens. So the first time you went driving, it was pretty scary, right? I mean, some of you might not remember, but it is pretty scary. But then you do it over and over again and it feels easier because nothing bad happens. And now you could probably do it, without even really giving it a second thought, right? Hopefully not, but I was about to say that. I was like, no, don't say that. But so here's an example of grizzly bears that are habituated to the railroad. Okay, so habituation isn't necessarily bad. It just is. It's a thing that happens, right? But so here are grizzly bears that are habituated to the railroad. Not great. I've picked up lots of dead bears off the railroad. Ideally, we wouldn't want them to be, but the reality is for them that they've figured out how to walk off the train tracks when a train's coming. So for them, it's worth it. The reason that we don't particularly want habituation when it comes to people and people structures, not only because of we don't want people and bears that close to each other, but also because we don't want bears coming into where humans are and maybe finding treats, right? Like we don't want them finding dog food. We don't want them finding chickens. We don't want them finding garbage, barbecues, whatever. Because then it can lead to food conditioning. Because bears are opportunistic. So they just cruise around their little world trying to find like the best treats for the least amount of effort. That's their whole world. So when they come across something delicious, like think about chickens, easiest thing ever, right? They're all like in a pen just ready for them. Little meat sacks that can't fly. I mean, brilliant. So like a chicken bear is really hard to turn that behavior around because it's such an amazing reward for them. And then they realize that those chickens are everywhere. And now you got yourself a problem. So food conditioning is a huge problem. Habituation in and of itself is not necessarily a problem, right? If your grizzly bear that lives up here was habituated enough to stay in that zone where she wants to be, so we'll kind of call it that buffer conflict or coexistence zone, and she always stayed 200 meters from people, she's still habituated to people, but that's pretty tolerable for everybody, right? The problem is when they get too comfortable, so there is no pressure keeping them sort of further and further away, and then they start coming in close to people stuff, and then they get into stuff, and then we got problems. Yeah, and that's where most of your bear conflict comes from, is these food conditioned bears. And so, I often hear people say things like, there's so many grizzly bears now and they're overrunning us. Well, there's way more black bears, right? And I think that a big part of why people perceive black bears as non-threatening is just because they're more used to them than grizzly bears. Most of us haven't grown up with grizzly bears around. But actually, black bears are far and above, cause more conflict. There's a bunch of reasons for that, obviously, because there are more of them. They're also more comfortable getting really close to people. So then they're in our space all the time. And then the grizzly bear problems that you see are primarily in the backcountry. So when you have like attacks or injuries to humans, grizzly bears, theirs tend to be in the backcountry. And so those are completely non-habituated bears to humans, right? Like they see a human for the first time or something, and they perceive them as a huge threat, just like any other carnivore species. It's usually a female defending her cubs, and so she defends her cubs. When they get used to us and they're living on our landscape, they don't perceive us as such a big threat. And so they're like, okay, they're weird, but I'll keep my distance, but like they're not gonna eat my babies, basically, right? Black bears, the majority of black bear attacks on humans are within high human use areas, so in towns and stuff like that. And the reason for that is because they get food conditioned, right? And there are still more black bear ones than grizzly bear ones. But we're not afraid of grizzly or black bears, it seems like. And so, yeah, so basically, coexistence, what is it? Well, it's kind of figuring out how we can both live on the same landscape that we want to live on. And they used to be in these valleys and stuff long before we were ever here. And they want to be back, you know what I mean? And it can totally work. A female wanting to raise her cubs sort of on the edge of where people live in order to keep them safe from big males, she's super risk averse. This is like the most risk averse demographic of bear because she needs to keep those cubs safe. So she is really easy to teach. Like these are the bears you want on your landscape. And she'll also keep teaching the next generation. So of all the bears you could have on your landscape, a good female with cubs is absolutely the best one. Also, little bonus, she will keep the black bears away, the real problem animals. But for real, for like every black or every grizzly bear, like basically pushes like 10 black bears away. So you're really winning on all fronts. And I think that's it.
Yeah, there's our emails again if anyone wants to ask us questions off screen. But yeah, if we have time for questions, feel free. Ask anything you want. Yeah. Oh, we'll go behind first. I saw that one.
The two days that killed last year, because you hear all sorts of rumors about it. So it's not that their mother was killed; they were just at an age where they were kicked out. Oh, dear. Sorry.
That's a good question.
Most likely, their mother is still alive, but we did not know that at the time. So that's the bear that we've been calling Clover. So she's been in the valley since 2020. I watched her grow up and with her sister, and now we're on to our third set of cubs. So that was her. We think she's back this season, but our DNA won't be in until the winter, so we won't know for sure. We can't say 100%, but she's most likely here. And she went through the same cycle of getting forced into estrus, so getting forced by a mate essentially, which stops her from lactating. And to defend her cubs, she kind of abandons them on their own way earlier than it should be.
Yes. So at 1 year old, it's unheard of in bear world. We've asked like every bear person we know, every bear biologist. Everyone's like, no, I've never heard of grizzly bears kicking them out of the yearlings. Unheard of.
And think of all the
bad behavior.
Well, the other ones are fine.
Yeah, the first set, great, but different context with every
Because
one.
they're massive, those bears.
And think of all the learning that they're missing, right? With their mother, they're getting pushed out at 1 year old.
Those are the ones that were laying on people's doorsteps.
Yes.
And stuff up in the valley.
Mm-hmm.
And that was before we had Sonia and our permits to do this pressure.
Yeah.
So we were waiting on our government permits at that time when they were in the meadows still. And the day we got our permits was when they were in Mount Curry.
Yeah.
So
And
we came in at a really unfortunate time.
You're just behind the 8 ball, right? And that's sort of
Yeah.
classic with behavior stuff. Like you just can't be behind the 8 ball because it's really, really hard to turn those behaviors that have gone like that far around. It's really easy to turn around just like a bear being like, am I allowed to be really close to people on their porches? And you're like, absolutely not. And they're like, oh, okay, this is weird. You know what I mean? And you can just like teach them. That's a way better place to start teaching them than like, oh, I found a bunch of delicious treats near homes.
I was just gonna say that we haven't had grizzlies around our place, just black bears, and we had to cut down all the fruit trees that were anywhere near the house. But one time after we got rid of the chickens, and then I got something to put because we always give the edibles to them, and so I got a big container and we put it inside the chicken house so I could, after it would rot over the winter, I could put it in the garden. Anyway, a bear swung in there, knocked it over, and ate that stuff. And a conservation officer told us, put bleach around there. I don't know if you've ever heard that. And so we, sometimes there's no reason for them to come up the stairs or places we don't keep feeders or anything. And so if I see a bear up there, I might just put a bit of bleach at the bottom of the stairs and around the cars or something. And I told some people, because on Pemberton Farm Road West, there was bears, and another friend of ours did have a bear get into their vehicle, wreck it, and I said, put bleach around it. So
I haven't heard that one.
No,
before.
I haven't heard that one before either.
Yeah. That's probably an older trick that may not be happening anymore.
Oh yeah, I remember one thing I forgot to say when I was talking about being able to use your voice. They've done studies across different carnivore species, and human voice is one of the best ways to sort of get a carnivore to go away, because they generally don't really like people, and so you're identifying yourself as a human and you're giving them a chance to leave, right? And yeah, so it's one of the better things to use. Like bells don't work, horns and sirens and stuff, that's all fine, but they don't necessarily realize that it's a human doing it, right? It's just a weird sound. So identifying yourself as human is super useful when you're trying to deter a bear. Yeah.
Have you ever had any scary experiences with bears?
Yes.
What was the scariest?
What was the scariest? Oof, man.
How have they been doing up the valley with, because they do put electric fencing around the farms now, don't they?
Yeah.
And it's working.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, working in national parks, that was one of the best, which I realize now in hindsight, that our attractants are very well secured, right? Like, because it's all garbage, like bear-proof garbage bins and stuff ever since the 1980s. And I actually did statistical analyses on attacks and using the before and after sort of that garbage management era. And it was, yeah, very much so. Food conditioned black bears were the primary ones, and it dropped right off after that attractant management. So it's really, that is the key piece. Also food conditioned grizzly bears. Scariest thing, man. I don't know. You know what though? I'll just tell you a funny one. How about that? And so I was brand new, like super brand new, very, very green. And we had just pushed this young grizzly bear, a teenager grizzly bear, over the tracks, past a like restaurant, across a little bridge, and then into into a forested area, but where there's a ton of trails. So this is in Lake Louise, so it's just like full of people everywhere. 4 million visitors a year. And I was like, should we like put up a warning or anything to let people know? And they're like, nah, it's fine. Everyone's like walking back to the office, which is like right there. And we get back to the office. This bear happened to be collared. So my boss at the time hands me the telemetry unit. It's basically like, whatever. It's a radio frequency signal thing that goes off of their collar. I'll get to you. You don't have to keep your arm up if it's tiring. So anyway, so he hands me this. It's the first time I've ever used one. And so I turn it on in the office to see if the frequency's in there. And sure enough, it's already on the right frequency because this teenager's, we've been dealing with her a lot. And it starts beeping. It doesn't even have the antenna on it. And I go, oh, what does it mean if it's beeping in here? And he goes, it's probably just interference. And I'm like, okay. Like, go tromping down the stairs, walk out of the warden office. I'm all jazzed and jump in my truck and go find a bear. It was a great, like, 4th day on the job or something. I come around the corner, and there's our bear. We were in the process of trapping at the time for a research project. So we did have a bunch of bait in like sealed containers, but in the back of the truck, and she could smell it. And so she's literally like paws up on the back tailgate, on her little back feetsies, and she's like nosing into the bear bait. And I like come around the corner, and it's probably like me to you away from her. And we both look at each other like this. And I'm like, I did the thing you're not supposed to do, which is I ran right back to the warden office door. She did not. She was just like, sweet. Like went back to do, like, can I get into this? Can I get into this bait? And I go around like try to get into the office door, and my boss just happens to come out, and he used to laugh, tell his story all the time, and laugh because he's like, I remember opening that door, and your eyes were just this big. I could see you behind your sunglasses. And I was like, the bear's right there. So anyway, he went and grabbed a chalk ball gun, and he just shot her out of there. But yeah, it was a good one. It was like, he has a good, first introduction and kind of the type of work I'd be doing for the next over a decade.
No, it's all your education and knowledge about, the bears, that they shouldn't go there, or you could help them or whatever. Was there ever a chance, or in your mind, that those 2 grizzly bears, the little ones, could have been saved? Or was every hope lost, or whatever, that they got shot?
Yeah, that's it's a really tricky question, right? Because it's all behavior based, and that means that everything changes very quickly. And so, like, I think that if I could have caught up with them much earlier while they were still up in the meadows, and they were still like, I think of it this way, like everything's kind of a continuum, like that one thing, but it's a progression, right? It's a behavioral progression into conflict. And so I would say that when they were at the very low level habituation, basically human habituation, like relative to what I'm used to with grizzly bears, like even being on porch steps and stuff, like that's pretty chill. I'm pretty sure I could have turned that behavior around pretty easily. That's when I probably could have helped keep them around. Little males are always trickier. I'm not going to lie. He may not have made it. he was also particularly bold. He was the one that was leading a lot of the conflict behavior. The little female, I really wish that even if I could have just separated her from her brother, up until a point, until she got into chickens. Once she got into chickens, I don't know if I could have turned her around. But up until that point, which was quite late, even after she'd been on this big escapade with him. Yeah. Sub-adults are always tricky, right? They're just like young and they're hard. You just do best you can with what you got. But yes.
Yeah, we had electric fence up. What we found is when they were sniffing the ground and moved up to it, then the fence hit their mane. They had to hit its nose, lifting its head, then it was gone. But if it just kept pushing with that electric fence against its mane, it was pushing it.
Right. So there's a bunch of different sort of specifications to do electric fences to be able to be like Grizzly proof, essentially. And so having your wires be quite low at the ground, and then it can start to get wider as you go up. And that is part of the reason why, and also cubs. So you can't really you can't give them any way in because they will get in, right? Like black bears too. They're super smart and they're like very food motivated.
And one of the main things there too is making sure the wire is super tight, right? So the idea is with their fur, if you have a grizzly bear electric fence, they'll push through, but it will separate the hair out and it will get to that skin level. So there's these tricks of the trade to make it, and not just grizzly bear proof, but obviously the same for black bears. But
if you make it grizzly proof, it's also black bear proof.
yeah.
You're up in Divine? Well, yeah, give us a shout. I mean, I'm up there sometimes. I could come take a look at it and give you some pointers.
I think he's done it. And my grandson took over, and I think he's done it a little bit different. He did it just well like this.
Right.
Many years ago.
Yeah, they're great tools though, electric fences, for sure.
Does the government help pay for that?
Whoopsie, inside laugh.
Yeah, no. We do not receive any government funding. It would be lovely if we did. But for the past, 2 years, they've been under extreme budget cuts. We've been told repetitively, and there's nothing available. So we're on our own on that front. The Ministry of Agriculture did step in one baby foot in the door back in 2021 to help set up one fence in the meadows. But that was just because there was a connection there with another organization. So since then, we don't receive any government funding on any of our program fronts. I think personally, as a farmer in the Valley, the Ministry of Agriculture should absolutely be stepping up and helping farmers in this onus. We're growing food for the public, and the entire onus is on farmers to do that whole process. Coast to Cascades helps us 50%, but we can't do everything, so we're doing what we can. But yeah, I think government should absolutely be supporting more, but they cannot, unfortunately. So
yeah, and that's a good point, right? It's like when the people who live in these what we were calling fracture zones, but they're also like these these interface zones where these are the people, like it's the residents here who are having to kind of bear the brunt essentially of coexisting with these bears. But it's true, and that's sort of the point of why we do think that like these types of programs are really important for like all these different reasons, right? Like the electric fencing, but also these things need to happen, and if no one else is stepping up to do it, then yeah.
If government did a lot of their job, we would not have jobs. That's what we always say. So we're here to step in that gray zone and try to provide that bridge for the people living on the face of recovery.
Cool. Thank you so much, all three of you, for coming. This has been really great.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.